You've definitely heard the word shock before, but probably to describe a surprise party, right? Well, in a hospital, it means something way more serious. It's a term for this incredibly dramatic, high-stakes battle happening inside the body, a fight for survival, literally at the cellular level. So let's dive in and really understand what's going on when someone goes into medical shock.
You know, it all really boils down to this one critical question. Every single cell, every tissue, every organ in your body depends on a constant, steady supply of oxygen, and that's delivered by your cardiovascular system. But what happens when that system breaks down?
So the first thing you have to get is that shock isn't a single disease. It's a syndrome. Think of it more like a cascading crisis where the body's cells are just being starved of oxygen. And that starvation, it sets off a predictable and really dangerous chain reaction as the entire body scrambles to deal with it.
Okay, so a crisis this big doesn't just happen out of the blue. It gets triggered by a major problem in one of the body's core systems. And it turns out there are 4 main pathways that can lead to this widespread oxygen shortage we call shock.
And these triggers are pretty different from each other. For instance, you've got hypovolemic shock, which happens from a loss of fluid. Think major bleeding. Then there's cardiogenic shock. That's when the heart itself, the pump, fails. With distributive shock, the fluid is all still there in the body, but it's leaking out of the blood vessels, so it's in the wrong place. And finally, obstructive shock is when something is physically blocking the heart from doing its job. See? 4 very different problems, all leading to one devastating result.
So, no matter what kicks it off, once shock begins, the body launches this desperate, all-out fight for survival. This internal battle unfolds across 4 distinct stages. And honestly, understanding these stages is the key to understanding shock itself. Here's the timeline for that battle. It all starts with the initial stage. Then the body mounts a full-blown defense in the compensatory stage. Things start to get really dicey in the progressive stage. And finally, you can reach the point of no return, the refractory stage. That's the whole arc of the body's fight.
The battle begins so quietly. In this initial stage, the problem is just getting started at a microscopic level. An alarm is going off, yeah, but it's way too faint for anyone on the outside to hear it yet.
And this is exactly why it's so silent. Deep inside the body, the first cells that are being deprived of oxygen have to switch their energy source. They go from their normal, efficient process to an emergency backup, something called anaerobic metabolism, which means without oxygen. Now, a key byproduct of this emergency power is lactic acid, and it starts the build-up. But on the outside, nothing. You can't see it. There are no obvious signs. The fight has started, but the person doesn't even look sick.
Okay, now the body knows it's in real trouble. That silent alarm has been heard by central command, the brain and nervous system. And it launches this powerful, coordinated, all-out defense to protect the most vital organs, no matter the cost.
What the body does here is just amazing. It's a brilliant act of internal triage. The sympathetic nervous system kicks into high gear, basically telling the heart and lungs to go into overdrive. Blood vessels clamp down, shunting all that precious oxygenated blood away from places like the skin and the gut and redirecting it to the command centers, the brain and the heart. The kidneys even start hoarding water to keep the blood volume up. And it's right here that we start to see the first clues: anxiety, thirst, restlessness. The body is finally sending out its first audible distress signals.
But here's the thing, you can't keep that all-out defense up forever. In the progressive stage, the body's own protective measures are starting to get overwhelmed. The front line is collapsing. And now, even those vital organs that the body was fighting so hard to protect are in grave danger.
This detail is just chilling. As the brain itself starts to be deprived of oxygen, the patient can actually feel that something is going terribly wrong. They might not know what it is, but they know it's catastrophic. This sense of impending doom is a classic and frankly terrifying sign. Now, the signs are obvious and they are severe. Vital organs start to develop hypoxia, that critical lack of oxygen. In the brain, that causes confusion. The heart starts beating really fast, but it's weak, and blood pressure just plummets. Because blood is still being pulled away from the surface, the skin gets cool and clammy. This is the moment. Without immediate medical help, the battle will be lost. And that leads us to the tragic final act, the refractory stage.
The word refractory is just a medical term for unresponsive. At this point, the damage to the cells and tissues is so widespread, so extensive, that the body just can't respond to treatment anymore. The battle is over.
So much damage has happened that this vicious cycle begins, leading to something called multiple organ dysfunction syndrome, or MODS. This is when the liver, kidneys, heart, and brain, they all start to fail. Even if doctors fix the original problem that started the shock, the damage is just too widespread. It's irreversible. Therapy doesn't work anymore, and sadly, recovery is no longer possible.
To make all this feel real, let's look at one of the most common triggers for shock, sepsis. This is what happens when a seemingly simple infection gets totally out of control and unleashes that entire four-stage cascade we just walked through.
And don't think for a second that this is some rare thing. Every single year, just in the United States, over 1.7 million adults develop sepsis. It is a massive public health issue, and it's a primary pathway to the devastating effects of shock.
You know, septic shock can be incredibly deceptive. In its early phase, called warm shock, the body is overcompensating like crazy. The heart's pumping hard, so the skin actually feels warm, and blood pressure might be normal or even a little high. The patient can look a lot better than they really are, but this can quickly collapse into the cold shock phase, which looks exactly like the late stages of shock we talked about: low heart output, cold skin, and crashing blood pressure. That switch is why spotting it early is so critical.
Because sepsis is such a medical emergency, there's a standardized, time-critical response plan called the Hour 1 Bundle. Within 60 minutes of recognizing sepsis, medical teams have to move. They measure lactate levels. Remember, that's the waste product from cells screaming for oxygen. They get blood cultures to find the infection. They start powerful antibiotics. They push fluids fast to support blood pressure. And if that's not enough, they use vasopressors, which are strong drugs that squeeze blood vessels to raise blood pressure. Every single step has to happen, and it has to happen fast. It is a race against the clock.
So, after seeing the body's entire battle plan, from that first silent alarm all the way to the final shutdown, what's the key takeaway here? Well, it's all about recognizing the earliest signs of trouble, back when the body is in that critical compensatory stage, fighting for its life.
These are the body's distress signals, and each one tells a piece of the story. Persistent thirst, that's the body begging for more fluid to keep its blood volume up. A faster heart rate and breathing, that's the engine running at maximum power to deliver oxygen. Less urine, that's the kidneys desperately holding on to every last drop of water. Even that feeling of anxiety or impending doom is a sign the brain isn't getting what it needs. These aren't just vague symptoms. They are the clear sounds of the body's all-out defense.
You know, recognizing these signs isn't just for doctors and nurses. Understanding what the body is trying to tell us during this internal battle gives all of us the power to spot a crisis before it becomes irreversible. It turns a scary medical term into a clear and urgent call to action. So the real question is, now that you know the signs, could you spot the silent emergency?